When I do this, I want you guys as loud as you can to say orange. 1, 2, 3. Orange! I can't hear you. 1, 2, 3. Orange! You took your fangs and you injected your words. My defense flew away like a cluster of birds. As time went on, your poison took its toll, and my muscles began to crumble as if I was old. My mind no longer focused on the task at hand, but on the snake that poisoned this man. I died slowly as you waited for your meal. But you messed up and you left the field. I cheated death, or so I thought. You wrapped your body around my heart tight. You kept kissing me sweetly into the night. You squeezed tightly around my soul. We held each other when we were cold. My pulse began to fade and then die at that point. You then swallowed me whole. Body, heart, and soul. Hey guys, I'm going to give you guys 1 minute to memorize this. Run. Where will you go? If you hide, no one will know. So go ahead and pause this video at this time and memorize run. Where will you go? If you hide, no one will know. We will get right back to this. You guys have exactly 1 minute. After exactly 1 minute, press play and we'll continue the video. Hey guys, welcome back. So, you guys took your minute. Hey guys, welcome back. So you guys, I assume, already took your minute. Now my question to you is, how did you memorize it? Did you repeat it to yourself over and over and over again after you paused the video out loud for 1 minute? Did you listen to me read the poem over and over and over again for 1 minute? How did you attempt to memorize it? Because that lets us know what kind of learners we are. So are we auditory? Are we auditory learners, or are we visual learners, or are we one of those kind of people that learn from repeating? So what kind of learner are you? And you'll learn what kind of learner you are based on how you absorb the information the best, and whatever method that is. So if you have to listen to me read that poem in order for you to remember what's being said, then you're an auditory learner. If it helped when you physically saw the poem written, then you're a visual learner. If you remember the poem by repeating the poem, then your repetition is what causes you to memorize that poem. And all of this goes into your short-term memory. So I'm just going to break it down for you. Short-term memory and then you have long-term memory. And to understand how to perform and access the information, you want the poem to be in your long-term memory. When you're first starting out performing this poem, it's going to be in your short-term memory. And your short-term memory is much similar to a computer. So in the computer or the technology world, you have RAM. RAM stores the information that you have on your hard drive in certain files in its memory. And it's only there as long as the computer is on. The moment the computer shuts off, it's gone. Whereas ROM stores it long term. Even CMOS stores it long term because it has its own battery. So we don't want your brains, when it's done looking at this poem, to shut off and you lose that. What we want to do is transfer the short term to the long term. We want to transfer that information. Now, how long it takes for you to be able to do that depends on your level of memorization and your commitment to that process. Of course, I'm going to go over some memorization techniques for you guys to help you so that way you feel more comfortable. The benefits of memorization and memorizing things while you're on stage is it makes you a lot more professional. It also gives you the ability to completely and totally engage with your audience because you know the poem. Yes, it does happen where you will forget the poem. That does happen. And there are techniques for that, for when that happens. But as it stands right now, we're going to work on getting this short term into the long term. So you remember things when you were a kid. You remember things when you were maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, but you just put down your keys and you forgot where it's at. That's the short term versus the long term memory. So what we want to do is we use our learning method, whatever method that is that you learn the best. So if we have the poem, we're going to write our new poem. We've written a lot of poetry so far. So pick one of those poems and you're just going to recite it to yourself. Maybe you'll read it and then play it back. And that's how you're learning. Maybe you're one of those people that has to read it on the paper. Okay, I got it. Read it on the paper. Okay, I got it. And then say it back out loud. I always do suggest when you're in your memorizational phase to say it out loud, because I think that that does help, saying it out loud. Some people learn by repeating it. So like literally rewriting the poem over and over and over again. Sometimes that helps. So those are the different memorization techniques that you can use. Now, what I will say is that memorization is not easy. It's not something that comes easy, especially when it comes to the poetry world. And you'll begin to push yourself when you begin to memorize multiple poems. So the benefit of also memorizing poems is you prepare yourself, which I know is far off right now, for a feature. And what that feature means is they give you a certain amount of time to be able to perform your poetry. So you'll begin to learn how long each poem is as it relates to how long it takes you to speak it. So once you memorize it, you also at the same time want to time how long it takes you to read it. And the reason being is because sometimes when you're featuring, you can get a 10-minute set, which is you have 10 minutes to perform as many poems as you can within that time frame, or you get a 20-minute set. And again, you get that same exact amount of time, 20 minutes to perform however many poems. And you want to be able to know how many poems you can get in during that particular time. So memorization is key. And accessing that information is key. Once you have it memorized, so once it goes from the short-term memory to the long-term memory, in order not to get rid of it, because the brain will push this away, it'll go away, it won't be accessible after a certain period of time if you don't at least perform it at least once or twice, or recite it at least once or twice. So you do want to refresh yourself and work through it. For long pieces, so a long piece is like 5 to 10 minutes. That to me is a long piece. Most poems are anywhere between 2.5 to 3.5 minutes. In the poetry slam world, after 3.5 minutes, you begin to get deducted points. So really, most people, they only write for 3.5 minutes. Certain performers, you'll see they'll write for 10 minutes. And it all relates to how many poems they can fit into their brain at one point and then perform it. So it does take practice, and it takes a lot of practice. So my suggestion to you guys is write your poems, go to open mics, perform as much as possible, read it if you don't feel comfortable, but on your own time, in your spare time, as you're walking down the block, as you're, by yourself on the train, just recite. It's just that simple, recite. And what will happen is you want to be readily able to access that information whenever you need that information. And that's very, very important, because although it may be in the long term, it may not be readily accessible when you need it. So you have to practice that information. So those are the techniques that I have for you. Another simple technique, if you guys find that you're memorizing a longer poem, my suggestion is and you're memorizing this longer poem and you're messing up a lot more and you're getting frustrated. Take a deep breath, breathe, go through the poem, right? The whole poem, as much as you can remember. And when you go through the whole poem as much as you can remember, the most important parts in a poem is the beginning and the end. Now, unless somebody knows your poem by heart, they're not going to know the words. So you don't have to necessarily know all the words to your poem if they don't know all the words to the poem. So if you know the beginning and the end of your poem, you can get through that poem. And that's one technique to get over that if you stumble or you find yourself not able to memorize a certain part. Another thing that may help is you may have to revise your poem because your brain just can't keep up with that particular thing for whatever the reason is. Another small technique that I do is I take my time. I'll memorize the first couple of lines. I'll go through the poem. Whatever I messed up at, I'll go back and just memorize that alone. Then I'll put a mental note to myself and say, okay, at this particular point in the poem, I switch the page and I go do what I memorized, and then I go right back. You have to be able to do that to be able to have that flexibility and dexterity mentally. And it does, again, it takes practice. Even some of the best poets I know, they mess up. But to have that ability to engage the audience and not look like you messed up makes the world of a difference between an entertainer and a performer and then just a normal reader. So that's how you start, guys. Go ahead and memorize the poems that you guys have. And let's see if you guys can recite the poem from the beginning of this video that I showed you. I'll give you a couple of minutes. Good job, good job. So guys, keep practicing, and that's my time. Stillwater Books in Pawtucket, one of the pillars of the writing community. How you doing?
Hey, how are you?
Here's my book right here. It's called Damont Combs Presents a Touch of Orange. It is currently in Stillwater Books. I also have my first book here, my poem, My Riddle, right here. Hey guys, so I'm just simply going to talk to you guys about the historical beginnings during this segment, or I'm going to talk to you about my own personal experience with this particular topic during this segment. Now that we got through all the technical aspects, I'm going to do it in another 5 minutes or less. So let's begin. So memorization for me was not easy at all. It was very, very difficult, but a great poetry friend of mine, special shout out to Eunice Kadu, he told me, as a poet, you must memorize 10 poem so you can perform that at any point in time. Somebody walks up to you at any point in time. So that's what I set out to go do. I set out to go perform 10 poems and memorize them. That's the first thing I did. And the techniques that I learned was through trial and error. Oh my gosh, it was really trial and error. So what I did was I found it easiest for me personally, to read a poem over and over and over and say it out loud, and then move the paper away, keep saying that poem, keep saying that poem. Any errors that I made, I go back, look at it, correct the errors, and go back. So that's just the way that I did it. And I found myself reciting the poem for at least 48 hours, as much as I possibly could. And then I keep going, and then I forget the poem because I overperformed it. So I realized that there had to be a period for me where I took a break, where I just did not recite any poetry at all in this particular process, like zero poetry. So I worked on one poem at a time. I would memorize the poem to get into my short-term memory, stop for at least 24 hours, no poems at all. And then I found myself able to perform because my brain needed time to process that poem into the long term, and it worked. I began to be able to perform all sorts of poems. So now I know over 15 poems off the top of my head at any given time. And that's, of course, that's me updating it, revamping it, changing it around. The poetry that I perform, I'm always changing. So that's just a little bit of memorization technique for you that I learned. That's my own personal experience with it, and my own push from my community to become a better poet. RNCs.